All right. Well, hey, folks, Jeff Salzman here, and welcome to the Daily Evolver. And a special welcome to those of you who are joining me live today. It's nice to know you're out there. And yeah, you can find all of my stuff at dailyevolver.com. And yeah, I think that's about it for housekeeping. What I wanted to do today is look at what I'm calling integral arisings in the culture. And it's one of the things that we get to do with integral theory, and that is to notice the, under its own power, evolution of human consciousness and culture on the planet. And I've noticed it. I've noticed the new thing arising, and I have some examples of it, and so I'm going to share those. And what I'm noticing is that there's a new attitude that's taking place in the culture war, at least among the people on my team, the liberals, if you will, and that there is a realization. It's almost like a married couple who, after 2 decades of fighting about cooking and the toothpaste and how to raise the kids, just get so bored with the same arguments, or they become less relevant. And we start to get curious about the process of fighting itself and our role in it, and how we need other people to see things the same way we do. And if they don't, then we get anxious and we try to colonize them and win them over, and how much time we spend in dueling worldviews with other people, other groups on the television and real life. And it's this self-observation that comes online where we can begin the dismantling of this us versus them mode. And that is characterized, that whole sort of process is characterized first by just surrender. And we realize we are just never going to win this battle. It's a horrible realization. Scott Peck says that that's the point where we have to start walking through the desert. We abandon all hope of winning. But then, if you're lucky, you continue and you have a chance at real community, which is where you get to see the gifts that the other side had all along, but you were blinded to. And that's the advanced class. But I think for now, we got to be satisfied with just plain old surrender. So I'm going to start with an example of that from one of my favorite culture warriors, Bill Maher, who has a special Real Time with Bill Maher on HBO. And so here's Bill Maher talking about how to prepare for the Thanksgiving wars. And this was I think his last episode before Thanksgiving. So what that means is this. It means I go to share and I go to desktop 2. And I won't have to do this every time, but I do to get it started. And I do share, right? Okay, so here he is where he's talking about the surrender, this idea that, you know, we got to live with these people. We got to live with each other. Here we go.
And never forget the single shining truth about democracy. It means sharing a country with assholes you can't stand. Think about that the next time you think you can own someone politically. Think about how you can see politics so differently from people who share your very blood.
And I want to be careful not to play too much of this because it makes the Google gods crazy and they crash the world down on you. So he goes on and he talks about how these people, these conservatives, these Trump supporters, put marshmallows on their sweet potatoes, and they wear matching outfits, and they hang testicles on their pickup trucks. And he says, most inexplicable, they like Donald Trump. And then he goes on.
We will never understand a brain that thinks like that, and they will never understand worrying about gluten all the time. America is a big country filled with millions of people who don't think the way you do and never will. We're stuck with them, and they're stuck with us.
All right. And then he goes on to warn us about where this could lead.
We've been hearing more and more about a second civil war, which sounds impossible.
Sorry, my live listeners, I edit this out, but bear with me.
Now, lately, we've been hearing more and more about a second civil war, which sounds impossible in this modern, affluent country. It is not. We are going to have to learn to live with each other, or there will be blood.
All right. Okay, that's where I would disagree with Bill, and I think there's, another factor that we can look into here, and that is that one of the features of evolution is that in the aggregate, people get more and more civilized, and that now in the modern era, I just did a podcast on how crime is down by half since the 90s, and what are the reasons. There's all these reasons that people postulate. My idea was Judge Judy, that she's a truth machine that is running all day, every day, and that people are watching it, and there's a uptick in consciousness as people learn from that. And so violence is down in general. And, we have if we looked at the Civil War, the equivalent number of people who would have to die today would be somewhere between 20 and 30 million people. And, that is just untenable. That's not going to happen. There's nothing like that going to happen. And in fact, in terms of the culture war between the left, as we know it, that sort of first came on in the 60s, the left is probably ahead. There were several hundred deaths in the 60s. Of course, there's Tim McVeigh from the right with several hundred dead. But, the idea that there being blood, it's one of the things that I think we can take some comfort in, and we can rely on, that at modernity, we don't ratchet back that far. So I actually, and I'm horrified to say this actually, I'm not sure that I wouldn't trust Trump not to try. But I don't think, the military, the police, these are way more than adequately modern institutions. But yes, we are in a civil culture war, and that is not pretty either. And Bill goes on to describe it. And this is where we get to the "it blew me away" moment, the most significant moment here.
Yes, I have been guilty of saying things like that, but I'm going to try to stop.
I think that is very significant that Bill Maher said he's going to try to stop insulting the people on the right. So we'll see if that happens. Pretty funny at any rate. Okay. All right, so then he goes on and he talks about how one of the things that he's learned is that what he saw as an anti-intellectualism on the right, or stupidity, if you will, comes primarily not, okay, so he says that he learned that the anti-intellectualism that he saw on the right came primarily not from stupidity, but from hate. And as he went on, he said, telling people you think they're irredeemable makes them say, I'd rather side with Russia than you. And then he talks about how this is happening on several different scales, politically, of course, but that these are people you work with, these are the people you go to school with, and these are people who you live with in your home. And it gets back to that husband-wife partner thing. And that home, as he puts it, is where you learn that the three magic words in a relationship are not, I love you, but let it go. And then he goes on and he talks about, don't get mad at Ellen DeGeneres because she's friends with George Bush, or Michelle Obama because she hugged George Bush, because that's where we need to go. And he ends with this sweet little vignette where he says, well, I'll play it. And even here he's just coming out of talking about how Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Brett Kavanaugh are friends in the Supreme Court.
A country that loves to look at pictures of entirely different species getting been guilty of saying things like that, but I'm going to try to stop. For a country that loves to look at pictures of entirely different species getting along, can't we try it in politics? All right, that's our show. We're off.
All right. So I thought that was a pretty significant moment in the end of Bill Maher's 2019 season, his final words before he goes out for a few months. All right. The next one I wanted to share is a segment from S.E. Cupp, who is a CNN host on weekends. And she had on her show one of my favorite comedy writers, actually. He used to have a column in Time magazine probably 10 years ago, Joel Stein. And he just wrote a book called In Defense of Elitism, Why I'm Better Than You and You Are Better Than Someone Who Didn't Buy This Book. So here he is on S.E. Cupp. And here too, I sense this arising of a new wanting to understand the other side and let them in. So here it is. First, he defines how he is using the term elites.
Look at the elite. And when I talk about the elite, I'm talking about, as you put it so well, the intellectual elite, not the money elite. The people who don't want a yacht, they just want to give a TED Talk. These are our people.
Yeah.
And
all right. Pretty funny. And then he went on to talk about what the sort of theme of his book, which is where he went to this county in Texas, I think it's Roberts County, with the highest percentage of Trump voters in the country. And like Bill Maher, he sees them as, not functioning as anti-intellectual so much, but they're functioning out of a animus, a hatred, is what Bill Maher said. Well, we'll see what Joel Stein says, but they're in an existential struggle against the elites, and they believe that they need corruption to fight corruption. And here's how he explains it.
Well, I think that there's a belief among Trump and his supporters that there is a corrupt world and that the elite are really good at corruption. And what you need is a leader on your side who's probably equally corrupt, but on your team and fighting the lying with their own lying.
Okay. And then she asks him, what would you tell somebody like Elizabeth Warren? What would you tell the elites? Say somebody like Elizabeth Warren about these people. Here's what he says.
I would say that those people are scared of you, and that you should listen to their pain. And to just boil it down to economics is wrong. Like, people feel like the country is changing.
All right. It's not about the economics. It's about the identity. And then he goes on to talk about how things like gay marriage and transgender rights and so forth that don't seem like a big deal to those of us who are urbanites are a very big deal to the people in Roberts County. And he talks about a judge in Roberts County who asked him, and Joel Stein lives in Los Angeles, but he asked him, would you leave your child with anyone in a 10-block radius of your house? Because the judge would. And, the transmission here is that the home and hearth people are holding something of great value. And he points out that the people who stayed in their hometown were 50% more likely to vote for Trump than those who moved even 2 hours away from home. And that really is the new divide in the culture. And, to use the typical political terms, populists versus the elites. But that's the crux of it. And I think that's right. I think that's a really good insight. And I think that we who moved away have a lot to learn about those who stayed. I think they do too about us, but they've learned enough about us. It's from just the culture, the culture that basically is a modern culture that is the pop culture in this country, or was for many years before a conservative culture arose. Okay, so the idea that the people who stayed hate us, as Bill Maher explains, or as Joel Stein explains, that they're afraid of us, may not seem like much progress over they're stupid. But it actually is, in the sense that it acknowledges that the leavers and the stayers, the movers and the stayers, live in different world spaces. And I think that part of what we need to do on our side, if you will, is to realize that we have an animus to them too. I mean, it's easy to project it onto Trump, but it's like S.E. Cupp says, it's an odd thing that she said at the end of that clip. If you remember, she said, it's actually bigotry. It's bigotry. And as I've pointed out numerous times, if you look at the popular culture that arose since the 60s, where the villain is always capitalism, religion's openly mocked, and all of that, of course, evolutionarily speaking, is right on schedule. It was time to deconstruct the triumphalist narratives of traditionalism. But the traditionalists don't like it. And what they do like is Trump thumbing his nose at the elites and the deep state and globalism and postmodern multiculturalism and, you know, your weird light bulbs and 15 flush toilets. And, you know, that's progress. To have Joel Stein on CNN talking about letting that sort of thing in. I have to say, I'm not crazy about the ending where they talk about well, I'll just play it for you. It doesn't feel like a surrender ultimately. And I regret that, but here's what he has to say. He's commiserating a bit with S.E. Cupp at this point. She's a conservative. She's a conservative. As she says, she generally votes Republican. She knows a lot of people of faith. It's very different, I note, than her saying, I have faith myself. But so she's a Republican elite. He's a Democrat elite. And here's what he says has to happen.
And people like you and I, who probably wouldn't have agreed on that much 6 years ago, are agreeing on a lot more now. And if we don't come together against populism, we are going to suffer.
Yeah, so I guess we have to band together, us elites, and go to war against the populists in the final analysis. I suppose there's a truth to that. There's part of it that has to happen. We both love and fight our way forward. So I guess that will continue for some time. Okay, so then the last one I wanted to point out is an excerpt from a special by a apparently quite popular comic. I hadn't seen her before, but she has a special on Netflix. Actually, she has a series of specials on Netflix. It's Iliza Shlesinger. And she's funny. You know, Netflix has sort of branded themselves as a home for comedians and these big shows. And this is her show about her year of getting married and the wedding, and it's called Iliza Shlesinger Unveiled. And it focuses a lot on the a situation for women, particularly around weddings, but she uses weddings to make bigger points about the state of being a woman in America. And she starts with a very positive message. And I, first of all, was shocked by it.
Okay, right now in 2019, more than it was 5 minutes ago, right now, it's the best time it's ever been to be a woman in most states. It's the best time. I said it, I meant it. The best time, okay? We are the most heard, the loudest in our message, the most unified. We are the most heard, the loudest in our message, the most unified.
Sorry about that. Then she goes on to say that, however, there is, as she put it, a splinter faction of feminists and women who get angry if you deign to disagree with an opinion. They want you drawn and quartered in a Twitter town square. And I love what she had to say about that.
Girls, there's got to be a middle ground where someone disagrees with you and you get the fuck over it, okay? You don't have to hate her. One woman's affirmation of her life choices is not the negation of your existence. Be better than that, okay?
And I think that is a very significant statement. There's got to be a middle ground where those who disagree with you are not the negation of your existence. And it really does get to this idea that our worldview is our identity. And that's true, you know, particularly as we move through traditionalism, modernism, postmodernism, also earlier than that. But at some point, we want to make that shift where we see that other worldviews aren't a negation of the one we have, but that they can actually be an addition to the one that we have. And that's, I think, where the culture war has to lead and will ultimately. It's going to be, you know, internet bloody in the meantime, but I have faith that we'll get through it. And as Scott Peck also says, that once we do walk through that desert, then we have the possibility of real community. And I'm on the side for that. All right. Well, thanks everybody. Check back next week for another live edition of the Daily Evolver. And I will be off for Christmas, of course, and then another, I guess the following, I think probably through after New Year's, but I'll keep it posted. All right. Thanks, folks. Take care. See you next time.